Great. So welcome to HESCO Services presentation of Rockwell's Parts Management Agreement, or PMA. My name is Chad DePasquale, and I'm the Vice President of Services for HESCO. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to learn a little more about the service. Transforms the traditional buy stock model to one of parts access. So my goal for today is to run through some issues we are seeing with our manufacturers as it relates to inventory, machine uptime, and cash flow, and then show how a PMA might help address and alleviate these areas of concern. Have you experienced machine downtime because the spare part needed was not on your shelf? Have you spent a significant amount of money overnighting a part just to get production back up and running? Have you pulled a spare part from inventory and had it fail? Are most of your critical spares out of manufacturer's warranty? Have you ever imagined how much money is wasted on spare parts that never get used? Are you tasked with reducing your inventory costs, increasing uptime, or both? If you answered yes to any of these questions, a parts management agreement can help overcome these issues and more. So next, we'll take a look at some issues created by the traditional buy and stock model for spare parts. So one thing we see are storeroom spares typically covering only 10 to 15% of your installed base. This is a risky proposition to be in when production and machine uptime are critical to a company's profitability. Critical spares are necessary to reduce mean time to recovery, but the issue is the cost of buying and holding onto these spares can be very capital intensive. Buying and stocking spare parts is done to ensure you have the right part on hand when the in-service part fails. Your return on investment in that part is seen once it's taken off the shelf, put into service, and then starts to support production. But what happens to all those parts that just sit there and collect dust and are never used? Your capital investment in those parts never show a return because they're never put into service. And that leads to a large amount of quote unquote sunk costs in your storeroom. Yeah, a good exercise is if your system can report on which storeroom parts have not been used in maybe the past 5 years or so, take a look at that total number and think what your company could do if that sunk cost could have been avoided or maybe even invested in another part of the business. Another downfall of traditional storeroom stocking has to do with the parts warranty. What happens when you need a part from your storeroom that's been there for 3 years or so? You grab it, put it into service, and it fails immediately. Typically after that amount of time, the warranty has expired from the manufacturer, and now you're forced to repurchase a new part after having paid for and storing that failed part on your shelf for 3 years. When new equipment is brought in and commissioned, part of the project funds most likely go towards buying spare parts, and that can quickly increase the total cost of the project. On top of that, if you don't have a process to compare what spares you already have on hand to what spares are needed for the new machine, you can quickly start accumulating duplicates and more spares than you actually need. Now, let's explore a little bit about how a PMA can address these issues. So what is a PMA? Simply put, it's a vendor-managed inventory program which allows customers to access critical spares instead of purchasing critical spares. When a spare is needed, you just pull it from the PMA stock, and at that time, you'll be invoiced for the use of the part. A PMA utilizes customer access to spares rather than customer ownership of parts. Because Rockwell owns and manages the spare parts at your site, and yes, they are located at your site, you do not have to pay for the item until it's needed and put into service. By utilizing the access model, you significantly reduce the sunk costs of having to buy and hold spare parts that may never get used. This new pricing model significantly reduces the cost to access critical spares. If you're a customer that falls into the statistic of having only 10 to 15% critical spare coverage, a PMA will help expand your critical spares to ensure you have the correct parts on the shelf to recover from a downtime event. We'll see the financial impact of shifting from ownership to access in a future slide. Because the inventory is owned and managed by a Rockwell, that level of control enables them to enhance the product warranty. This means the warranty clock does not start until the item is actually put into service or the seal is broken. So in the previous slide's example of pulling that 3-year-old part from the storeroom, blowing off the dust, putting it into service, and then having it fail immediately and having to buy a new part, well, with a PMA, that same scenario would result in the customer receiving a warranty replacement at no charge if that did fail. If new equipment is commissioned at your facility and more critical spares are needed, it's simple and easy to add them to your existing PMA without having to outlay a significant amount of cash. What if a machine is decommissioned and parts need to be removed from inventory? Well, if you own the storeroom parts, you'd have to get rid of them and realize a financial loss. With a PMA, you can remove the unnecessary parts and avoid that financial loss. To achieve even more inventory savings, you can send your bad cores back to be remanufactured and placed back into your PMA stock. So we typically see about a 50%, up to a 50% savings when you do that repair or remanufacture of your bad part. And I do want to take a second just to talk a little bit about what I believe to be the single largest opportunity for our manufacturing customers to save money. And that is utilization of repair and remanufacturing services. If you're using Rockwell, or for that matter, any vendor's product, you should always look into repair and remanufacturing services as a quick way to save a significant amount of money. Like I said, up to about 50% compared to purchasing new parts. For those of you not familiar with reman services, this is where you send your bad core back to Rockwell. They repair, update your part, and send it back to you with a brand new warranty. Rockwell has 3 levels of remanufacturing services. The first is economy. It's the lowest cost. Typically takes about 2 weeks to complete the remanufacturing of the item. And when the item comes back to you, it comes back with a 12-month warranty. The next step up is the standard reman service. This is the same as the economy service, but 2 distinctions here. One, the part is sent back to you in about 3 to 5 days instead of a few weeks. And 2, when the part comes back to you, it now has an 18-month warranty instead of 12. So actually, this reman option is now getting into the realm of a longer manufacturer's warranty. And finally, the top level service and most popular is priority. The service level will overnight you a remanufactured unit from Rockwell's Exchange Hub. Once you get the new part, you just install it, put your bad part into the same box that the reman part came in, take out the prepaid shipping label that came with the reman part, and send it back to Rockwell. That's it. This service is the fastest of the 3 levels and comes with a 24-month warranty. And again, all these reman services will save you money over buying new, not to mention they're reducing waste, and as we're utilizing the bad core that failed, repairing it and sending it back instead of just tossing out the bad core and buying a brand new one. Just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of these services, as I think it's a quick way to reduce your MRO spend. And the PMA, getting back to it, can contain many kinds of spare parts. It goes without saying that we can populate PMAs with Allen Bradley parts like PLCs, drives, HMIs, etc. The high dollar critical spares. But we can also populate the PMA with consumables like terminal blocks or relays and even third-party parts. If you utilize engineered to order parts from Rockwell, we can even put those on the PMA for you. So PMA can cover anything from your unique engineered to order parts all the way through low value consumables like terminal blocks. Very flexible. This slide shows some of the benefits of moving away from traditional part ownership to part access. We've talked about most of these in the previous slides, but I do want to talk a little bit about a PMA becoming more of an operating expense. When you populate a storeroom with inventory, this typically is a capital expense and needs a lot of cash up front to procure the parts and fill the storeroom. This can sometimes pose an issue with cash flow, as needing to produce tens or even hundreds of thousands of dollars to buy spares can strain budgets. When you utilize the PMA part access model, that capital expense is moved to a flat operating expense. There is no longer a need to find all the cash to procure spares, just the small monthly fee charge for access to the critical spares. This monthly fee is now a flat, predictable cost that the finance department typically likes to see. A PMA helps to rationalize your inventory by giving you the ability to quickly add and remove items and avoid unnecessary buildup of spares. It helps to reduce your inventory carrying costs through utilization of the access model to inventory rather than the traditional outright buy. By having the correct spare parts on the shelf, the PMA also helps reduce mean time to repair, which means more uptime and more productivity. All of these features help to maximize machine uptime by ensuring you have the correct type and amount of spares on site and ready to use. Here's an overview of the math behind the PMA and replenishing with new items. And just a note here, typically PMAs utilize remanufacture parts for replenishment, just as an additional cost savings. So the numbers you see here are quote unquote worst case in terms of price, meaning if you were to replenish with all new, then it's going to be your highest cost scenario. So the left column in blue is the PMA service with a monthly access fee. I just started with $100,000 of list price spares that we wanted to put on our PMA. From there, the yearly access fee is calculated, and that comes to $13,440, or to break it down per month, $1,120 per month for access to $100,000 worth of spare parts. From here, we can see that years 1 through 5 cost $38,440 per year for a total of $192,200 over the life of the contract. Now that $38,440 includes $25,000 of spare parts purchased every year to replenish what is used from the PMA. I just took that $25,000 figure as a kind of average and just to plug in what you can maybe expect to see when you buy spare parts every year. And again, that number is just to cover what's pulled from the PMA. So when you add that $25,000 to the $13,440, you get a yearly cost of $38,440. Now let's compare that to the right column in red, which is the cost breakdown based on traditional buying of spares. We started with the same $100,000 of list price material, but to make this real world comparison, I applied a 13% discount on that list price. And that brought the $100,000 down to $87,000. So the $87,000 would represent what a typical manufacturer would pay to buy $100,000 list price of spares. From there, we added in that $25,000 of spare parts, so that doesn't change, that carries over, that's the same, to replenish anything used. Now, if we take a look at the year 1 cost in this scenario, it's a big contrast to the PMA scenario. And the reason for the large increase in price is due to the cost to purchase all the spares up front at once. So $87,000 to buy all the spares, and then another $25,000 to replenish what has been used. And that comes up to $112,000 in year 1. But starting year 2 and continuing through year 5 in this scenario, the only other ongoing costs are those just to replenish the used inventory. With this traditional approach, you can see that a lot of cash is needed up front, but the subsequent years are lower compared to the PMA. Now let's look at the total cost lines at the bottom of each scenario in green there. The PMA option total cost over 5 years is $192,200. Compare that to the scenario on the right, which is $212,000. And that's if you were just to buy the parts outright and store them in your stockroom. This scenario results, the PMA scenario results in a savings of about $20,000. Not to mention that you could have unused inventory totaling tens of thousands of dollars. In this example, I just used $62,000 as unused inventory that's just sitting there that hasn't been put into service. And just take a minute to think, what could you have done with that $62,000 if you didn't need to lay that out in year one to buy those parts? Could you buy more critical spares? Could you invest it in other parts of the business? Now we're going to take a look at the same chart in this slide here, but we're going to replenish the PMA inventory, not with new inventory, but with remanufactured inventory. So the PMA, with remanufactured inventory, we can see, up to 50%. I use 30% as the cost savings on the replenishment line. So that $25,000 we used in the previous scenario comes down to $17,500. And again, that's just using a 30% savings by utilizing the remanufacturing services that we've been talking about. So this reduces the total 5-year cost for the PMA option from $192,000 on the previous slide to $154,000 on this slide. Roughly about a $40,000 savings. Those savings added to the standard PMA savings that we saw before total just over $57,000 compared to traditional purchasing of the material. And I really wanted to lay out this remanufacturing scenario just to show you the power of how much you can save with utilizing remanufacturing services and a PMA. So why purchase a PMA? First, it'll give you immediate availability to critical spares at your facility. This helps close the gap between what spares you have and what spares you need. With access to the proper spare parts, this will increase your machine uptime. You'll also see a reduction in mean time to recovery, mean time to repair, because the critical parts will be located on site at your facility. You will also see a reduction in carrying costs of that inventory since Rockwell will own it, and you'll just pay a monthly access fee. And finally, a PMA will transition the cost of critical spare inventory from a capital expense to a more predictable operating expense. This helps to improve cash flow by avoiding any storeroom stock up for new equipment and by paying smaller access fees in increments over the life of the contract. So that's it from me, a pretty quick overview of the PMA, but I just wanted to say thank you for taking the time to learn more about PMAs. If you're facing any of the issues mentioned, just let's get in touch and see if a PMA is the right option for you. I'm here to help out, and don't hesitate to reach out to me with any questions about PMAs or any other services. And I put my contact info up here, and I'll keep it up for you. If you have any questions, please unmute yourself or send them in through chat. If you don't want to send them over now, just feel free to call me or email me directly with the questions that you have, and I'll wait a few moments to see if we have any.